Hey folks, sorry about that. The program suddenly cut. So why do we get a null result? Well, this is important for between subjects designs, but sometimes we fail to find an effect because there's not enough of a difference between our groups. So one of the things that we're going to learn about in psychological statistics next semester is that especially when we are looking for differences between groups, we need to make sure that the differences between the groups are sufficiently large enough. If they're not, you will not get a statistically significant effect. And for different types of statistical tests, like t-tests, part of the way that that test works is you are looking at the averages between those two groups. And so if those averages are not far enough apart, you won't really get a significant effect. It's possible that there's too much variability within a group. And so this can really mess around with your group mean, and that will mean that it's not that different from another group mean. So again, we fail to find an effect because one group might be a bit too variable. We also have to consider the possibility that there is no actual effect in the real world. And sometimes that happens. Now, occasionally it has been brought up that a study may not have been well designed. I actually had an instance a couple of years ago where I talked with another researcher who had done very similar work to the work that I had done on my honors thesis. And when I mentioned that I was unable to find an effect and that not everybody could, she then decided to somewhat condescendingly inform me that if I didn't get it, it's because I didn't design the study well enough. But, and that's probably true. On some level. I mean, I was a college undergraduate with my first attempt at a research study, but I had people that were good people who had done research that could back me up, that knew what they were doing. Additionally, this is a case where critical thinking skills might come into play. I have often found that for this particular failed effect, the only people who seem to get it are people who are working in conjunction with a particular lab. If you have no contact with that lab, you don't get the effect. If you do contact the lab, or if you've worked with somebody from that lab, you'll get the effect. And if it's that experimenter specific, I'm going to take a hard line and say it's probably not real. If your effect is so subtle that just a slight change in instructions gets you the effect, it is probably not something that is that big in the real world. Now, that's a bit of a hardline stance, but it's important to use critical thinking skills. If you find that most people who have failures to replicate are not making contact with a particular lab, and anybody who is getting a replication of an effect is working with that lab, that should really set off your signal that this is an experimenter-specific effect and thus might not be entirely accurate. Now, why might there be few between groups differences? Your book talks about this a bit. The manipulation might not be strong enough. So if you're looking at the effect of money on happiness and you're either giving people $0 or 25 cents or $1, well, frankly, 25 cents is not really that different from $0, and $1 is not that different from $0. It's not that strong enough. We need to make these manipulations a bit more dramatic, a bit more obvious. Our measures may not be sensitive enough, so those ceiling and floor effects that we talked about. Now, why might there be too much within group variability? There could be too much error variance or too much noise. So too much variability between groups. It could be because of measurement areas or measurement errors. It could also be because our individual differences are far too large. And if that's the case, you may want to shift to a within subjects design or a matched groups design so that everybody can basically be their own control and you can kind of rule out that variability. And sometimes there's just no effect. there are things in the world that do not have an effect. For example, vaccines do not cause autism. But here's one of the issues, and I would say that this is a big thing that we do very, very badly. So we need to find out more about the world. And that means finding out the things that are real and also finding out the things that aren't. That means finding significant findings and also reporting null findings. Now, because of the way that we do things, only significant findings have a tendency to get published. So for example, I put a lot of work into my honors thesis, but because it was a failure to replicate, it was not published because nobody's really interested in null findings. And that's what's known as publication bias. It is also sometimes referred to as the file drawer problem. So odds are pretty good if you went and talked to any researcher out there, especially in areas like psychology, odds are pretty good that they have a bunch of studies that they ran and they've never published and they've never reported because they were null findings. So they're basically effectively sitting in a file drawer. I have them. My colleagues have them. My doctoral advisor certainly has them, and this has really important implications. So if we're dealing with something that is an experimenter specific effect, like the kind I've mentioned, or if people get these findings because of questionable research practices, the null findings and the failures to replicate don't get published. The only thing that gets published is the thing that finds the effect. And there's so much data out there showing in psychology that not all of our findings replicate. And so what this means is that the studies that may not be able to get replicated are being published, and the failures to replicate, which are actually showing the truth, don't. So this has really important implications. We're going to talk about what these implications are later on in the semester. We'll talk about it more next semester as well. And it's something to kind of keep in mind. And it's my reminder to you to keep your critical thinking cap on at all times. Be skeptical about what you read. Don't be cynical. Some findings do replicate. Many do, in fact. But it's important to be skeptical about what you read. So that's all I have for this week. Sorry for the little hiccups that have caused you to have more videos this week than usual, but a good chunk of them are shorter. I will see you very, very soon. Bye.